welcome to my segment of the Atheists Facebook convention. My name is Troy Boyle, the Atheist Advocate, and we're filming in my lavish, palatial Union, Kentucky bedroom, which is not perfectly clean, but you know, we'll make do. Today I want to talk to you about epistemology, which is a great word to use on Facebook or when you're debating a theist. There's nothing more impressive than to type out the word epistemological in your response, because it's a big word and it makes people think that you know what you're talking about. But really the concept behind it is very simple. Epistemology, very simply put, is how do you know what you know? From what source material do you derive your knowledge? And how do you know that your knowledge is trustworthy? When you're debating a theist or talking to someone without much of a basis to their argument, they will always use appeals to authority. For instance, in the case of a theist, they'll often refer to the Bible. The Bible is the only source that they know. It's the only source that they have that backs up their belief system. But epistemology goes beyond having a source, and it questions the validity of that source. It's not enough to have a belief in something. It has to be justified. With atheist epistemology, the idea is that what you believe has to be based on sort of a concrete system of inquiry. It has to be based on sources that are reliable, that are reproducible, that are objective. That is, you can show something to be true to anyone from any walk of life, and their particular culture or their particular viewpoint doesn't affect the validity of that information. There's no cultural bias. There's no preconceived notions. And this is hard to come at even with science. So what science does is it says, well, if something is falsifiable and it has a rigorous body of evidence behind it, and it's peer-reviewed by the community of scientists, we have confidence in that fact. We have confidence in that knowledge. Therefore, our epistemology is that information is only valid when that information is qualified by belonging to these various categories. That it's peer-reviewed, that there's a substantial body of evidence, that it's falsifiable. And none of these tests work when they apply to beliefs or opinions or subjective information. A lot of times you'll talk to theists about the age of the earth, creationists and young earth creationists, and they'll say, well, how do you know you weren't there? Well, I don't have to be there. My personal subjective experience of evolution is immaterial. We have a body of evidence. We have experiment. We have a fossil record. We have a robust system of application. If it weren't for the validity of evolution, then gene therapies wouldn't work. Biological sciences would have no underpinning. It would collapse like a house of cards. Therefore, we have a lot of confidence that evolution is true. We have a lot of confidence that genetics, based upon the evolutionary theory, is reliable, valid, epistemologically accurate information. Whereas, and conversely, creationists base their opinion on the Bible. And the Bible is a poor source. It's a poor episteme because it's a single source. It's not corroborated by any other source. There's no experimental models that can be formed using creationist theory. You can't get an empty bowl and ask God to reproduce the creation event in the bowl and he won't comply and do it. You could perform that experiment if you want and say, God, put a bunny in front of me and wait for that bunny to appear. It's not going to happen. Try as you may. Even though the Bible says, and I'm cribbing here, but the Bible says if you have the faith of a mustard seed, which is very, very small, mustard seeds are very tiny. If you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can say to a mountain, move, and lo, that mountain will move. Well, I challenge you to perform the experiment. Take any number of theists to any number of mountains, ask for it to be moved with the faith of a mustard seed or more, and I guarantee you the mountain will not move. The bunny will not appear. The amputee will not grow his arm back. So the validity of the source material of the theist's belief, his subjective opinion, does not survive the kind of inquiry that science performs. So the epistemology of the theist is very, very weak. They'll always try to avoid an argument on epistemological grounds. But epistemology is sort of the intersection of belief and opinion and objectivity and subjectivity and how we determine whether or not knowledge is reliable. So don't let a theist, when you're talking to them or arguing with them about the validity of their viewpoint, try and jettison epistemology from the debate, because epistemology is the core of the atheist's refutation of theology of God. It's not enough to say, I believe this because I feel it in my heart. It's not enough to say, I believe this because I had an experience. It's not enough to say, I accept the experiential data of others. Those are not foundationally good sources of knowledge. Knowledge has to be reproducible, and I know I'm repeating myself, but it has to be reproducible, and it has to be falsifiable, and it has to be objective, or as close to objectivity as we can get. And with science, you have sort of a guarantee of objectivity that arises from the use of machinery, cameras, sensors, spectrometers, devices that weigh and measure, and recording what those instruments tell us in a non-biased manner, then presenting that information that you've recorded to the peer community of scientists who then check your work, because bias might creep in and change what you've recorded, change what you've observed, change the information, and made it what you want it to be rather than what it is. And that's a good a check or a balance against letting your internal beliefs and your internal feelings influence the information that you're trying to present. Having peer review, having other people look at it, is a way of saying, I don't even trust myself. You know, I could be insane. I could be chemically altered. I could be tired. There are a lot of things that can affect my cognition. There are a lot of things that can affect the way I view information. So the best thing I can do is record that information using instrumentation and using techniques that are designed to eliminate personal bias, and then give that information to my peers and let them look at it. So that's how we would establish good epistemology. That's how we would develop source material that's valid. So that's really all I have to say about epistemology. But when you're talking to people online, go ahead and use the word. It makes you look smart, especially if you know how to spell it. Make sure you know how to spell it first, or you'll look like an idiot. Pardon me, I've got a cold. But I want to transition now away from how we know what we know into a topic that there's been a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of argument about it, both within the atheist community, among each other, and in the atheist community as opposed to the theist community, and that's the historicity of Jesus Christ. I know a lot of atheists who make the claim, I don't believe that Jesus was a supernatural, Son of God, miraculous sort of a figure, but I do believe that he was real, that he was a historical preacher, that he was a revolutionary Jewish rabbi, and that we should, even if we don't accept his divinity, we should accept him as a real person, and perhaps follow those teachings if you're of that bent. I don't buy it. I don't buy it on epistemological grounds. A little coffee for my throat. One of the ways that we're told by accommodationist atheists that we should accept the historicity of Jesus Christ is that they say historians, by and large, accept the existence of Jesus Christ. And that may be true, but, and this may get me into some hot water, a historian is not a scientist. Let me make that very clear. A historian is not a scientist. A historian is a historian. And the bar, the level that a historian needs to say, this is historically valid, or this may have occurred, or this person has historical significance, is very low. All it requires is one or two mentions, either within one source document, oral traditions, several different poems from the area, and boom, that's it, you're historical. That's all it needs. That's not enough for me. To determine whether something is real, I want to use instead the same sort of scientific principles for how we know dinosaurs were real. I want forensic science. I want something with more weight to it than a couple of mentions. Now, I suppose if historicity to you simply means the historian community accepts the existence of Jesus Christ, so I do too, well, that's how you feel, and that's fine for you. But I don't give the weight to historical evidence that I do to forensic evidence. So to me, the question is never going to be settled. There is no forensic evidence of Jesus Christ. There's never going to be forensic evidence for Jesus Christ. So to me, the question of whether or not there was a historical Jesus is no. That's the answer as far as I'm concerned. We only have one source document, the Bible. The Bible is obviously a vested instrument of those who wrote it. There are too many similarities in my mind between the life of Jesus Christ as written in the Bible and the life of other messianic figures from other religions. So the idea, well, there must have been some truth to this because all these people, believe it, that doesn't wash for me. And I guess it's a personal decision, and you can make your own. But for me, there has to be kind of a confluence of historical data and forensic data, and then we have a habeas corpus. Then we have an evidentiary basis on which we can say, now there is some truth to it, or we can ascribe some truth to it. And so when you're talking to a theist on Facebook or on some other medium, Reddit or whatever, wherever you happen to be, Google Hangouts, whatever, and the question of the historicity of Jesus Christ comes up, they will usually say something like, if you have to accept the testimony of experts, then you have to accept the testimony of historians. Well, I do, but I give them only as much weight as they deserve. Let's put it that way. There are other historians like Dr. Richard Carrier, a good friend of mine, who was the first guest at the National Atheist Party's annual convention in San Francisco. He gave a wonderful lecture on why we should question the historicity of Jesus Christ. And I kind of agree with him that if this person had been real, even discounting the miraculous things that he was supposed to have performed, if this person was real, he would have been mentioned by more authors than the 2 or the 3 or the few that we have, who are generally vested interest authors. A lot of talk is made about Josephus's mention in the Flavium Josephus, whatever. Well, that was written when Josephus was, it was 90 years, I think, or 100 years after the events. So I don't consider that contemporaneous. That would be like if, Elvis's death wasn't reported for another 40 years. 40 years from now, the media would suddenly say, oh, and guess what? Elvis Presley has died. I'm sorry, but I don't think that a figure of such fame as to inspire a global religion would be ignored by the vast majority of historians and writers that were active during his lifetime. There should have been, he mentions like daily newspapers of the day, the town crier. Somebody should have written down or noticed, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of living, active, historical sources during Jesus' life, or supposed life. The idea that they would just ignore him until 50, 60, 70 years after his death doesn't make any sense to me. Does it make any sense to you? Well, that's all I've got to say. So those are 2 things to take with you. Epistemology and how to evaluate whether your sources of facts or your sources of truth are valid, and how that applies to the historicity of Jesus Christ. You know my opinion. I'd like to know yours. So I'll be in the Google Hangouts and I'll answer Q&A. Hopefully my voice will improve by then, but who knows? Until then, have a great day. Have a great new year. Bye.